Why did the room fall silent the moment her name was called? It wasn't respect. It wasn't admiration. It was the kind of silence that carried doubt, skepticism, and a hint of ridicule. 30 men stood on the weapon's range that morning, their eyes fixed on the lone woman cleaning her rifle with quiet precision. She didn't need to look up to know what they were thinking. She could feel it in the weight of their stares, the way they exchanged smirks and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Women don't belong here. Women can't handle seal weapons. The words had been spoken minutes earlier by the man who ran the facility, Master Chief Blackwood. His voice still echoed in her mind, deep, commanding, carrying decades of combat experience. Too much recoil. Too much responsibility. Women can't handle SEAL-grade weaponry. Grace had heard worse in her life, but never from someone whose approval could decide her career. She didn't flinch, didn't react. Instead, she focused on her weapon, wiping down the bolt, checking the chamber, moving with the discipline of someone who didn't just know what she was doing but lived by it. At 27, she was the first woman to pass preliminary SEAL weapons training. That fact alone was enough to make her a target. To them, she wasn't a teammate. She was an experiment, an outlier, a test case everyone expected to fail. Blackwood's voice cut through the silence, hard as steel. She set her rifle down and looked up, her expression unreadable. Center stage. His eyes narrowed. Let's see if you can handle real SEAL equipment instead of playing with training toys. The chuckles started low, spreading like wildfire through the rows of trainees. A few pulled out phones. They wanted evidence. They wanted to capture the moment she stumbled, the instant her hands shook, the second she proved them all right. Grace didn't give them that. She rose from her bench, walked to the center of the facility, and stood tall under the harsh fluorescent lights. Blackwood gestured toward a long steel table where weapons gleamed under the overhead bulbs. "Observe," he announced, his tone sharp with condescension. "The MK-18 CQBR, the SCAR-H battle rifle, the M249 saw, and the M82A1 sniper system. These," his hand swept across the table like he was presenting sacred relics, "are real weapons, for real warriors." His gaze locked on Grace, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Pick your poison. Show us what women can do with actual firepower." The men leaned in, ready for a show. They expected hesitation. They expected her to freeze, to pick something manageable, something safe. But Grace didn't hesitate, not for a second. She stepped forward, her eyes passing over the rifles and carbines, before resting on the largest, heaviest, most unforgiving weapon on the table. The M82A1, a .50 caliber beast weighing nearly 30 pounds, the kind of weapon that rattled bones and punished shoulders. "The .50 cal," Blackwood's laugh rang out. "That thing will dislocate your shoulder. You sure about this choice?" She didn't answer. Words weren't her weapon. She lifted the rifle with steady arms, carried it to the firing line, and set it down with mechanical precision. Every movement was practiced, deliberate, controlled. She adjusted the bipod, locked in her position, and peered through the scope. "Target acquisition," Blackwood barked. 5 shots, 5 different targets at 800 meters. Miss one and you're out of the program." The air in the facility tightened. The trainees leaned forward, eager. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of her breathing, slow, measured, disciplined. Then the first shot rang out. The recoil thundered through the room, brass casing clattering to the floor. On the far range, the first target's center disintegrated in a puff of shredded paper. Perfect hit. The silence deepened. Her second shot followed, quick, clean. Another center strike. Third shot, center. Fourth, center. Fifth, dead center. No deviation, no hesitation. 5 shots, 5 kills, all before the laughter had even faded from their faces. But she wasn't finished. Without asking for permission, she transitioned to the SCAR-H battle rifle, engaging moving targets at 400 meters. Her trigger finger moved like clockwork, each round snapping into targets that most of the men couldn't even track. She dropped the SCAR, picked up the Mk-18, and cleared the close-quarters simulation with ghost-like speed. Headshots, double taps, controlled bursts. Finally, she hefted the M249 saw, the weapon most recruits feared for its weight and recoil. She set down suppressive fire patterns with such control that the instructors monitoring the system checked their screens twice, convinced there had to be an error. By the time the last casing hit the floor, the range was silent, truly silent, not the silence of mockery, not the silence of waiting for failure, but the silence of men realizing they had just witnessed something they couldn't explain. "Lucky day," Blackwood muttered at last, though his voice carried no conviction. His jaw was tight, his pride bruised. "Real combat is different. Paper targets don't shoot back." The words barely left his mouth before alarms shattered the silence. Sirens wailed. Red lights flared across the facility. A door slammed open and Commander Hayes stormed in, her face pale but focused. "All qualified personnel report for immediate deployment," she shouted over the noise. "We have American hostages in hostile territory. This is not a drill." The shift was immediate. Phones vanished into pockets. Grins disappeared. Every man snapped to attention. Hayes wasted no time. She activated a tactical display, satellite imagery glowing across the screen. 12 hours ago, a Marine reconnaissance team was captured behind enemy lines. 6 Marines, including captain, are being held in a fortified compound 20 miles inside hostile territory. Intel suggests they'll be executed in 18 hours unless we act. The display zoomed in razor wire guard towers, heavy patrols. A fortress. "This is volunteer only," Hayes said grimly. "Survival probability, less than 40%. Every hand shot up. Hayes's eyes swept the room. "Equipment includes everything you just trained with. SCAR-H rifles, Mk-18 carbines, sniper systems, M249 support weapons. If you can't handle these systems under combat stress, don't volunteer." Blackwood stepped forward, seizing his moment. "Ma'am isn't qualified. She's still in training." Hayes glanced at her tablet, cutting him off. "According to her scores, just achieved perfect qualification on every system we're deploying. She's not just qualified, Blackwood. She's the highest scoring operative we have." The words landed like a grenade. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was heavy with something else. Realization. "Gear up," Hayes ordered. "Helicopters lift in 30 minutes. Bring everyone home." Within half an hour, 4 A-60 thundered into the night sky. 31 SEAL operatives strapped in, weapons at the ready, heading into hostile territory on a mission with almost no chance of survival. Grace sat in the lead aircraft, the across her knees. The same men who had laughed at her hours earlier now sat wordless beside her. Some stole glances at her, as if trying to reconcile the woman they had mocked with the operator who had just rewritten the rules in front of them. She didn't meet their eyes. She stared into the darkness through her night vision goggles, her face calm, her mind quiet. Doubt was gone. The laughter was gone. What remained was a question none of them dared ask aloud. When the bullets started flying, would she prove them wrong again? Why did the pilot's voice crack when he called out, "Taking fire"? The helicopters had barely begun their descent when tracers ripped through the tree line. Red streams of light stitched the night sky, tearing across the rotor blades. Bullets pinged against armor plating. The aircraft shook with each impact, and for one fragile heartbeat, it felt as if the mission might end before it even began. Grace's hands tightened around her SCAR-H battle rifle. The thrum of the rotors drowned out her pulse, but not her instincts. Through her night vision goggles, she saw muzzle flashes, tiny bursts of death, hidden in the darkness below. Most of the men on board hadn't even spotted them yet, but Grace had. She always did. The helicopter banked hard. "Hold on," the pilot shouted. The moment the skid touched dirt, Grace was already moving. She leapt from the aircraft into the chaos, landing low, her rifle braced, eyes scanning. Her first shots cracked through the night. Two muzzle flashes winked out instantly. Another enemy fighter dropped before his rifle could finish its burst. To the others, the shapes were just shadows. To Grace, they were silhouettes painted in sharp detail. "Sniper North Tower," someone yelled. Panic rippled through the squad, but Grace had already seen him. She dropped to one knee, slid the M82A1 from its sling, and shouldered the weight like it was nothing. Her crosshairs found the faint outline of a man behind reinforced glass, his rifle pointed toward the landing zone. One breath, one squeeze. The .50 caliber thunder shook the ground and the sniper was gone. The silence that followed was almost louder than the gunfire. How did she even see him? One of the younger operators whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. But there was no time for questions. "Move out," Master Chief Blackwood's command cut through the night. "South approach, rear security." Grace acknowledged with a clipped nod, though her eyes were already on the terrain. The south was the obvious entry, which made it the most dangerous. She glanced north, undisturbed brush, elevation, cover. A better vantage, a better choice. Orders were orders, but lives were lives. While the team pressed forward, Grace slipped into the shadows, circling wide through uneven ground. She moved like she belonged to the dark, her boots whispering against soil, her rifle cradled close. Every step was measured, every sound calculated. By the time she found her position, the SEALs were less than 300 meters from the compound and blind to the storm about to hit them. Through her scope, Grace counted them. 42 enemy fighters scattered across the compound like chess pieces, patrols with AKs, RPG operators crouched in shadow, 3 heavy machine guns fixed on likely approach points, and worse, a commander with the kind of hand signals that spoke of discipline, not chaos. These weren't amateurs. This was an ambush waiting to happen. She keyed her radio. "Blackwood, this is Viper. 12 hostiles flanking east. Machine gun nest at grid 847-91. I can eliminate them. Request clearance." The response was sharp, clipped. "Negative, hold position, do not fire." Her jaw tightened. She watched as men moved like predators closing in. The ambush was seconds away. She had the shots. She had the skill, but orders wrapped chains around her trigger finger. Then it happened. Automatic fire erupted from the tree line. Bullets shredded branches, sparks flying as rounds ricocheted off stone. The SEAL team dove for cover, pinned, their formation collapsing under the sudden storm. Shouts filled the comms. "We've got wounded." Taking fire from the east. "3 down," Blackwood's voice cracked across the radio. "Request immediate support." Grace didn't wait. Her thundered. The machine gun nest tearing into her teammates collapsed in a spray of metal and silence. Another shot, the sniper pinning Blackwood, disappeared. She swung left, fired again and again. Targets fell, but more surged forward. Too many, always too many. She dropped her scar already shouldered, and advanced. Controlled bursts. Muzzle rise barely noticeable. Each pull of the trigger bought seconds of survival for the men trapped in the kill zone. "What's your position?" Blackwood barked. "North wall, 200 meters," she answered between shots. "Hostages in central building. Recommend immediate assault." "Negative, wait for backup." Through her scope she saw what he couldn't. Fighters moving toward the hostage building, weapons drawn. Their body language screamed intent. The executions were seconds away. She didn't ask again. Grace broke cover, sprinting low across open ground. Explosive charge from her belt pressed against the wall. Detonation shook the night. Dust, stone, and fire showered the air. She slipped through the breach, rifle raised. Inside the compound was a maze. Narrow hallways, low light, enemies at every turn. Her rifle barked in short, disciplined bursts. 1 target, 2, 3. Not a single wasted round. She moved like water, flowing through corridors with purpose. Every door she breached was cleared before her shadow even touched the frame. At last she reached the hostage building. Through grimy windows she saw them, 6 Marines bound and blindfolded, rifles aimed at their heads, executioners ready. Her breaching charge blew the door inward with a deafening roar. The world slowed. Grace entered low, her rifle steady. Her shots snapped out precise, surgical. 6 captors fell in less than 10 seconds. Not one Marine touched, not one mistake. U.S. Navy, her voice cut through the haze of smoke. You're safe. Captain blinked through his blindfold as she sliced his restraints. Who the hell are you? Lieutenant, she answered, handing him a pistol. U.S. Navy SEALs, we're here to bring you home. The disbelief on his face was brief, replaced by the raw relief of survival. They sent a woman. They sent the right person, Grace corrected, checking the corridor. Can you move? All 6 mobile, confirmed, though his men were bruised, bleeding, exhausted. His words turned heavy. But we're surrounded, at least 40 hostiles, and they know exactly where we are. Grace checked her ammo, half a mag in the scar, a few charges. Her was 200 meters behind her, out of reach. The odds pressed down like weight on her chest. Then one Marine's voice broke the room. Ma'am, we didn't just get captured, we were betrayed. Someone fed them our position. Her blood ran cold, betrayal, which meant the mission wasn't just dangerous, it was poisoned, and the extraction plan, it might already be compromised. She keyed her radio. All call signs, this is Viper, possible compromise on, recommend alternate. Static, dead air. His face was grim. They're jamming us, we're cut off. Grace peered through the shattered window. Enemy fighters regrouped in the courtyard, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. 42 against 7. A massacre waiting to happen. Every logical calculation said the mission was over. No comms, no support, no ammunition to spare, no hope. But Grace had never lived by logic. She lived by something else. She raised her rifle, her jaw set. Here, what we're going to do, I'll clear a path to the north wall. When I give the signal, you move fast. Don't look back. No matter what you hear, keep moving. Shook his head. With respect, Lieutenant, that's suicide. Her eyes flicked to the men behind him, tired, wounded, terrified, and then to her rifle, heavy, waiting. Master Chief Blackwood said women can't handle SEAL weapons, she muttered, almost to herself. Let's prove him wrong. She positioned herself at the window, overlooking the courtyard where enemy fighters massed like a storm. Her wasn't in her hands, but her mind was already counting shots, targets, angles. 8 rounds left in her pack, 42 enemies. The numbers didn't matter, not to her. What mattered was time, time to give those men a chance. And if it cost her everything, then so be it. Why did the first shot change everything? The enemy had the numbers, the angles, the compound. But Grace had something they didn't expect, a calm precision under impossible odds. She slid into position at the shattered window. 8 rounds. That was all. Each bullet would need to matter. Each shot had to carry the weight of 7 lives, the 6 Marines behind her and her own. The enemy commander barked orders in the courtyard, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise. Fighters rushed to positions. Machine gunners dragged weapons toward cover. RPG operators slung tubes across their shoulders. Grace's scope locked on the commander. One slow breath, one steady squeeze. The .50 caliber roared. The commander dropped instantly, his chest torn open, his orders silenced mid-command. The effect was immediate, chaos. Fighters shouted, confused, eyes snapping toward the window but unable to pinpoint her position in the dark. Some froze, others hesitated. Grace had bought seconds. Her second shot snapped across the courtyard, shattering the comms operator's radio. The man collapsed with it, blood spilling across his chest. Without communication, the fighters became fragments, squads shouting into the void, no coordination, no chain of command. Grace fired again. A squad leader's head jerked back, his body folding into the dirt. Her fourth shot found another leader trying to rally the scattered fighters. Panic spread faster than discipline. Half her ammunition was gone. 4 rounds left. 38 enemies remained. But numbers don't matter when fear enters the bloodstream. Her fifth shot struck an enemy who was screaming for others to advance. His body crumpled mid-shout, silencing him forever. The courtyard fell into fractured shouting. No unity, no courage. Her sixth round found a fighter sprinting for the north wall, making the others believe there was an entire SEAL squad cutting them off from that direction. Grace paused, 2 rounds left. She shifted her scope, scanning for the greatest threats, RPG teams. If they reached position, the compound would become a graveyard. And then the sound. A low vibration, faint at first, then louder, rising above the shouts and gunfire. The distinct, heart-stirring whir of US-60 rotors. The extraction force was coming. But the enemy had seen them too. RPG operators scrambled for angles, sprinting across rooftops, weapons rising. Grace's 7th shot cracked, obliterating the first RPG gunner before he could shoulder his weapon. Her final round took the man carrying spare rockets, his body tumbling down stone steps. Empty, 8 shots gone, 30+ enemies still alive, and yet the tide had shifted. Move now," Grace shouted to the Marines. And his men bolted, moving fast toward the breach in the north wall. Their boots pounded against the dirt, lungs burning, but they didn't look back. They didn't dare. Grace dropped slung her scar and covered their retreat, short, controlled bursts, each round a barrier, each shot a message, not one step closer. Across the compound, explosions rocked the southern defenses. The SEAL team had breached at last, their gunfire a rolling wave crashing into enemy lines. Blackwood's voice thundered over the radio. "All units converge on extraction. Secure the hostages." But Grace was already ahead of him. She pressed forward, her weapon barking, every movement calculated, every corner taken with ghost-like precision. The Marines kept moving, driven by her command, her fire, her presence. The chaos was total. Enemy fighters broke in every direction, some toward the breach, some toward the hostages, some simply running into the night. Panic eats courage faster than bullets, and Grace had fed them enough fear to last a lifetime. By the time she reached the north wall, they were circling low, their searchlights cutting through the smoke. Marines scrambled aboard, pulling each other in, gasping, bloodied but alive. Grace was the last one to reach the landing zone, her scar nearly dry, her chest heaving. Blackwood was there, covering with his own fire. For one moment their eyes met. Not mockery, not doubt. Respect. Status, he shouted over the roar of rotors. 6 Marines extracted, 0 casualties, Grace answered, voice steady despite her pounding heart. Mission accomplished. The helicopters lifted, straining against the weight of men and the pull of gravity. Enemy tracers reached for them but fell short. The compound grew smaller, distant, swallowed by smoke and failure. Inside the air was thick with silence. Marines leaned against the walls, exhausted, staring at the woman who had just pulled them out of hell. Some whispered thanks. Others just stared, trying to reconcile survival with the person responsible for it. Leaned forward, voice hoarse. "Lieutenant, you saved us, all of us." Grace looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "That's the job," she said quietly. "We bring people home." Blackwood sat across from her, helmet off, sweat streaking his face. For the first time in his career, he didn't have words. 30 years of combat, and he had never seen anything like it. One woman, outnumbered, underestimated, and victorious. He stared at her weapon, still warm in her hands, then back at her. The line he had spoken days earlier rang hollow now, almost laughable. Women can't handle SEAL weapons. But he didn't say it again. He never would. Grace leaned back against the vibrating wall of the helicopter, eyes drifting shut for a moment. Exhaustion pressed against her like a tide, but underneath it was something quieter, something steadier. Not pride, not relief. Resolve. Because she knew the truth, the battle wasn't over, not really. Someone had betrayed the Marines. Someone had fed their location to the enemy. And as they carried them back to safety, she understood what that meant. The fight ahead wouldn't just be against enemies on the battlefield. It would be against doubt, against betrayal, against a system that wanted her to fail. But she had already proven one thing beyond all doubt: weapons didn't care about gender. Neither did survival. And if anyone wanted to test that again, Grace Viper was ready. Why was the debriefing room so quiet? 31 SEALs sat in the rows of the facility at, uniforms stained with dust and blood, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Rescue missions always ended with silence. Not the silence of peace, but of weight, the kind that settles over a room when men realize they should be dead, but aren't. Grace sat apart from them, her posture straight, her eyes forward. The Marines she had rescued were gone now, rushed to medical, alive because she had made impossible choices in impossible. And yet, as the screens flickered with images of the mission replay, drone footage, heat maps, gunfire captured in grainy infrared, all eyes kept drifting toward her. Not out of mockery anymore, not out of doubt, out of something they didn't quite know how to name. Commander Hayes stood at the front of the room, her voice crisp as she summarized the operation. Hostages extracted, 0 American casualties, enemy compound neutralized, mission considered complete success. Her eyes scanned the report on her tablet before lifting toward the men. And, she continued, her tone sharpening, Lieutenant Grace accounted for 47 confirmed eliminations, 47 rounds fired, 47 targets down, a 100% rate under combat conditions. The silence deepened. 100%. Not even the best snipers in the program held those numbers. Hayes set down the tablet, her voice softening, almost reverent. What Lieutenant accomplished last night does not just qualify as exemplary, it redefines exemplary. Her tactical initiative saved 6 Marines and enabled this team's extraction. Without her, this operation would have ended in disaster. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Grace kept her face neutral, but inside her stomach twisted. She didn't hear exemplary. She heard the whispers of the Marines she had cut free. We were betrayed. The mission hadn't just been dangerous, it had been poisoned. And now, sitting in the very base where someone might have orchestrated it, she felt a cold unease. But Hayes wasn't finished. From this day forward, she declared, Lieutenant will oversee advanced weapons training for this facility. If you want to learn how to handle SEAL-grade weaponry, you'll learn from the operator who just set the standard. Gasps. A few heads turned. Even the veterans shifted in their seats. Training had always been run by the old guard, men like Blackwood who carried decades of experience. To hand that mantle to someone still so young, a woman, no less, was a shift they hadn't seen coming. Grace rose to her feet slowly, the room watching, waiting for her to speak. Her voice was quiet but steady. Weapons don't care about gender, she said. They respond to skill, training, and discipline. If you master those, they'll never fail you. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth, spoken with the simplicity of someone who had just lived it. But when she sat back down, she caught a look from Blackwood. Not skepticism anymore, something darker. A conflict raging behind his eyes, respect and guilt. Because he had doubted her, because he had mocked her, and because now, in front of everyone, his own authority had been stripped by her precision. The meeting ended, men filing out silently. Grace stayed seated, her mind replaying the moment in the hostage building when had said those words. We didn't just stumble into capture. We were betrayed. That thought stayed with her as the days turned to weeks. Training resumed. She stood on the range now, not as a trainee but as an instructor. Men lined up, their hands on rifles, their eyes following her movements. Some resisted at first. Pride didn't break easily, but pride didn't put bullets on target either. And when they realized her drills shaved seconds off their reloads, improved their groupings, kept their shoulders intact after hours on the saw, resistance gave way to silence. Then silence gave way to grudging respect. Yet even as she trained them, Grace's own mind was elsewhere, on the compound, on the betrayal, on the unanswered questions. Who had leaked the Marines' position? Who had jammed their comms? At night she sat alone in the barracks, replaying the mission in her head. The enemy had been too prepared, their positions too perfect. Someone had guided them, someone close. One evening Blackwood appeared at her door. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He held no weapons, no armor, just the weight of something unsaid. "Permission to enter, Lieutenant." Grace studied him for a moment before nodding. He sat on the edge of the bunk opposite hers, his large hands folding together. For a long while he said nothing. Finally, his voice broke the silence, lower, stripped of bravado. "You silenced the entire base." Grace didn't respond. She waited. "I spent my career saying women couldn't do this job," he continued. "That the weight would break you, that the recoil would shatter you, that the battlefield didn't have patience for anyone different." He exhaled, the sound heavy. "And then I watched you carry a .50 cal into combat and save men who would died under my command." He looked at her then, his eyes glinting under the dull barracks light. "I owe you an apology, not just for that day, for every day I doubted you." Grace held his gaze. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "You owe the truth, to yourself, to them." She gestured toward the range outside where trainees drilled late into the night. Blackwood's shoulders sagged. They were betrayed, weren't they? The words were a knife. Grace didn't answer, but her silence told him everything. "They told you," he murmured. "Yes," Grace replied quietly. "And until we know who, none of us are safe." The room was still for a long moment. Then Blackwood nodded slowly. "Then we find out, quietly." It wasn't a pact spoken aloud, but it was understood. Two people who had once stood on opposite sides of belief, now bound by a single purpose. Weeks later, Grace found herself on the range again, watching trainees work through a live-fire drill. One of them fumbled, letting it dip too low, the bipod clattering. Grace's voice cut through the air, sharp but calm. "Respect the weight. Control isn't about strength, it's about discipline. Breathe, reset, do it again." The trainee obeyed, this time landing the shot dead center. He turned back, eyes wide with something that hadn't been there before, belief. But as she watched him, Grace felt the unease again. The sense that behind all the drills, behind all the new respect, shadows still moved. Someone inside the system had betrayed them. Someone still wanted her to fail. And in the silence that followed the shot, she realized something that chilled her blood more than any firefight. The mission hadn't been the test. This was. Why did the respect feel so fragile? On the range, the men no longer laughed when she spoke. They listened. They adjusted grips, steadied breathing, corrected stances. Her words shaped their movements, her presence reshaped their discipline. Yet beneath the silence of obedience, Grace felt it, a tension that never left, like eyes watching her too closely, waiting for a crack. Respect, she knew, wasn't the same as trust. Respect could be forced by proof. Trust had to be given, and trust was still absent. Late nights blurred together. After hours of drills and endless reports, Grace sat alone in her quarters, replaying the mission in her mind. She could still see the hostage room, the executioners lifting rifles, the whisper from "we were betrayed." That single phrase gnawed at her. Who inside their own circle had traded American lives? Who had set the Marines up, left them to die, confident no one would question the failure? Grace pulled open her locker, retrieving the after-action reports. She'd read them a dozen times. The intel brief, the plan, the failure of comms. On the surface, nothing glared back at her. And yet, the enemy had been too precise, too well prepared. Coincidence didn't draw RPG teams to rooftops at the exact moment arrived. This was inside work, she was sure of it. She wasn't alone in her suspicion. Blackwood, once her loudest critic, now stood quietly at her side. He didn't voice it in the open, but every exchange between them carried an undercurrent. Shared looks in the hallway, quiet questions behind closed doors. They were hunting the same ghost. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the California coast, Blackwood found her at the range. He leaned against the steel frame, arms folded, eyes shadowed. "You see the comms log?" he asked. Grace set down the scar she'd been cleaning. "I did, nothing unusual." "That's the problem," Blackwood muttered. No jamming chatter recorded until the team was already pinned. But jamming doesn't just appear. Someone knew exactly when to hit the switch. Grace studied him. "You think it was local?" His jaw clenched. "I think it was someone who had clearance." The words hung heavy between them. Clearance meant trust. Clearance meant someone in this very facility. Days passed. Grace started watching differently. Not just targets on the range, but the men around her, who looked too long when she walked past, who whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, who stiffened at her presence not with doubt but with fear. One name kept circling back. Petty officer, a trainee with average scores but always in places he shouldn't be. Twice she caught him near restricted comm stations. Once she saw him pocket something quickly when he thought no one was watching. On paper, he was forgettable. In reality, he felt like smoke, impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. Grace said nothing at first. Accusations without proof meant career suicide. Instead, she noted, quietly, logged times, logged movements. And yet suspicion was a lonely weight. Her peers still eyed her with unease. Some had shifted from mockery to awe, but awe created distance. They whispered about her accuracy, about her storming a compound alone. But in the mess hall, tables stayed full when she entered, men shifting to the far end instead of beside her. She had silenced their doubts, yes, but silence didn't make her one of them. At night she sat by her bunk, remembering the words she had told. "We bring people home." She believed it. But what about when the danger wasn't across an ocean? What about when it lived inside your own walls? Commander Hayes called her in one afternoon. The office was dim, blinds half closed against the sun. Hayes studied her with that piercing stare that seemed to strip a person down to truth. "You're restless," Hayes said simply. Grace held her posture. "I'm fine, ma'am." "No," Hayes replied. "You're watching, hunting something, I see it." Grace hesitated. Could she speak? Could she risk voicing the word betrayal to a superior who might very well be part of it? She said nothing. Hayes leaned back, fingers steepled. "Good instincts, Lieutenant. Don't let them eat you alive." Grace left the office with her mind burning. Was that advice or a warning? The days stretched, each one a balance between instruction and suspicion. She trained recruits until their hands bled, until their shoulders ached, until they began to understand that discipline wasn't punishment but survival. Yet even as she drilled them, she saw glances exchanged. Men checking doors twice. Conversations cut short when she approached. The betrayal had infected the base like an unseen virus. No one trusted anyone completely, and Grace felt herself drifting into isolation. One night she found Blackwood waiting outside her quarters. His face was grim. "You were right," he said quietly. "I checked comms access logs, was on shift the night the jamming started." Grace's stomach tightened. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Blackwood agreed, "but it makes him worth watching." Together they began to, discreetly. Patterns didn't fit. Long phone calls outside the perimeter. Late-night visits to storage he had no clearance for, always slipping just out of notice. One evening Grace followed him. Alone. She trailed him through the darkened halls, her boots silent, her heart steady. ducked into a comms room, lights low. Through the narrow window, she saw him bent over a console, fingers flying across keys he wasn't authorized to touch. Her hand hovered over her sidearm. She could confront him, drag him out, but proof mattered more than instinct. So she watched, waited, burned every detail into memory. When finally slipped out, Grace stayed behind. She moved into the room, scanning the screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. Transmission logs, encrypted bursts to coordinates overseas. Someone wasn't just feeding intel, they were still feeding it. She what she could, slipping the drive into her pocket. As she exited, the hallway stretched quiet, too quiet. Then she felt it, a presence. "It's not your problem, Lieutenant." The voice was low, firm. "Hayes." Grace froze, her stomach knotting. Slowly she turned. Hayes stood in the shadows, her face unreadable. "Ma'am." Hayes stepped closer, her gaze sharp. "Careful. You start chasing ghosts without proof, and you'll find yourself branded paranoid, or worse." Grace held her eyes. "I don't chase ghosts, I chase facts." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Hayes stepped back into the shadows, leaving only her final words hanging in the air. "Then make sure you survive what you find." Grace returned to her quarters that night with the drive heavy in her pocket and a truth heavier in her chest. The betrayal wasn't just rumor. It was alive, feeding, breathing inside the very walls meant to protect them. And now she knew too much. The silence in her room pressed against her, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence before the storm. Why did the second mission feel wrong before it even began? On paper, it was straightforward. Covert insertion, recover stolen intel from a hostile relay station overseas, minimal resistance expected. The kind of mission SEALs train for in their sleep. And yet, as Grace sat in her hands steady on her weapon, her stomach told her something the briefing didn't. This wasn't going to be simple. The faces around her were stone. Even Blackwood, strapped across from her, looked heavier than usual, weighed down by something unspoken. The men followed their routine checks, nods, silent prayers, but the air felt thick, too careful, as if everyone sensed the trap waiting just beyond the horizon. Grace didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after the Marines. Not after the logs she'd seen in the comms room. Betrayal had a scent, and she smelled it again now. The pilot's voice cut through the headset. 5 minutes to insertion. Grace scanned the darkness outside the helicopter window, NVG's glowing faint green. Terrain blurred beneath them, valleys, broken ridges, shadows deeper than the night itself. It was perfect ground for an ambush. She checked her rifle again, the metallic click of the chamber grounding her. In her pocket, the drive sheet from console burned against her leg. She hadn't told anyone what she found. Not yet. Proof was fragile. One wrong word and it would vanish, buried under accusations of paranoia. The bird dipped lower. The clearing ahead looked clean, too clean. The second they touched down, Grace felt it. Not sound, not sight, just instinct. The way silence pressed too tightly, the way shadows seemed to breathe. "Go, go, go," Blackwood barked, leading his men into the tree line. Grace moved with them, boots finding dirt, rifle raised. The night pressed in, cold and still. They advanced in formation, her pulse steady, her eyes cutting through the dark. Then the crack, a single rifle shot. The clearing erupted in light. Muzzle flashes tore the night open. Bullets stitched through branches, slamming into dirt, bark, armor. The SEAL team dove for cover, but the air itself was fire. "Contact front, heavy fire," someone shouted. Grace rolled behind a log, scanning. They weren't facing a few guards, they were surrounded. Dozens of fighters poured from the trees, rifles blazing, voices shouting in a language she knew too well. It wasn't resistance. It was an execution squad, waiting, ready. Her stomach clenched. Again, another perfect ambush. "Who the hell gave away our position?" One operator yelled, desperation cracking his voice. Grace didn't answer. She fired. Short bursts, clean shots, one hostile down, another. Her rifle barked in rhythm with her breath. She saw gaps in their fire, threads of weakness others missed. But there were too many. Blackwood were cut off, she called over comms. I know, his voice was raw, furious. We push north now. Rounds cracked inches from her helmet. She returned fire, suppressing, buying seconds. She saw a machine gun team setting up on the ridge. If they opened, the team would be shredded. She dropped one with a clean shot, then shifted and nailed the assistant before he could grab the weapon. But for everyone she cut down, two more emerged. Grace, Blackwood's shout cut through the chaos. She turned. He was crouched low, blood streaking down his arm, his rifle still blazing. His eyes locked on hers through the haze. This isn't bad intel. This is inside, again. The words hit like confirmation of everything she already knew. And then the worst sound, a rocket tube hissed in the night. That had dropped them off exploded midair, the shockwave throwing men to the dirt. Fire lit the sky, raining debris across the valley. The pilot's screams were swallowed by the roar. The team was stranded, no air support, no comms, no way home but through. Grace's throat tightened, but her hand stayed calm. She dropped another hostile, then reloaded with mechanical precision. We need high ground, she called. Agreed, Blackwood barked. Fall back ridgeline now. The team began moving, fighting step by step, pulling wounded with them. Grace stayed at the rear, her fire covering every stumble, every retreating boot. She felt the weight of eyes on her again, but not the mocking stares from months ago. Now it was something heavier, something desperate. They needed her. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and steep. The climb would be hell under fire, but higher ground meant survival. They pushed, bullets snapping against stone as they ascended. Grace hauled one wounded man by his vest, shoving him upward, then turned to fire again. Her magazine ran dry. She swapped in silence, hands sure even as tracers lit the night. Another shot, another target dropped. Her breath came hard, but her rhythm never faltered. At last they reached the top. Blackwood barked orders, men spreading across the ridge, rifles steady. From up here they could return fire with precision. The ambushers faltered, pulled back, regrouping. The battlefield went quiet for a moment, only the hiss of burning wreckage filling the night. Blackwood moved beside her, his chest heaving. His eyes burned with anger, not at her, but at the truth neither of them could deny anymore. They knew we were coming, he said, voice hoarse. Knew our route, knew our time. That's not coincidence, Lieutenant, that's betrayal. Grace wiped blood from her cheek, her rifle still warm. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. I've got proof, she said quietly. Blackwood's head snapped toward her. What proof? She tapped the pocket where the drive lay. Comms logs, encrypted transmissions. Someone here is feeding them everything. His jaw locked. Fury rippled across his face, but beneath it was something sharper, fear, because betrayal inside meant rot at the core. The enemy began shouting below, regrouping for another push. Blackwood raised his rifle. Then we survive this night, and we burn the traitor out. The second wave hit like thunder. Fighters surged up the ridge, climbing, firing, screaming. The SEALs returned fire, muzzle flashes carving the dark. Grace moved like shadow, her shots unerring, her position shifting, never still. Each time the line wavered, her presence steadied it. Blood, dirt, smoke, the ridge became a crucible, and in that crucible the truth seared itself deeper into Grace's mind. This wasn't just war. This wasn't just survival. This was someone's design. Someone on the inside had decided who lived and who died. And as the night burned around her, she swore silently. She would find them. She would drag their betrayal into the light. No matter what it cost. Why did the silence on the return flight feel heavier than the firefight itself? That came for them hours later were too late for the pilot who had gone down, too late for the three men zipped in black bags at Grace's feet. The valley was behind them now, burning in memory, but the weight of betrayal flew with them, pressing against the cabin walls like a suffocating fog. Grace sat with her rifle across her knees, hands steady though her body ached from exhaustion. Her uniform was stiff with blood, not her own. One of the younger operators, barely 24, had died with his hand clutching her sleeve. She hadn't been able to pry it free until the ridge was secure. Blackwood sat opposite her, his arm bandaged tight, his face unreadable. He hadn't spoken since the firefight ended. Neither had most of the men. They avoided her eyes now, not out of mockery, not out of doubt, but out of something heavier. Guilt. Fear. Because they all knew what Grace had said in the valley was true. Someone on the inside had fed their killers. The helicopter's rotors drowned thought, but not memory. Every operator replayed the ambush in his head. Every one of them knew it had been too clean, too perfect, too exact to be anything but betrayal. When they landed the sun was already rising, painting the sky in reds and golds that felt cruel. The survivors moved in silence, unloading the wounded, carrying the dead. Grace helped where she could, her muscles screaming, her body refusing to quit. She moved one of the body bags herself, refusing to let others shoulder the burden alone. Commander Hayes was waiting. Her posture was rigid, her expression a mask. Report. Blackwood spoke first, his voice harsh. Ambush. Enemy was dug in before we arrived. Losses, 3 KIA, 2 critical, 4 wounded. Hayes's jaw tightened. Her eyes swept over the men, then landed on Grace. For a fraction of a second, Grace thought she saw something, not grief, not anger, but calculation. Understood, Hayes said. Medical for the wounded, debrief in 2 hours, dismissed. The men scattered. Grace remained, her boots planted, her eyes on Hayes. She said nothing, but the silence between them was louder than words. Hayes held her gaze, unflinching, before turning away. That was when Grace knew. Hayes already understood. Later in the debriefing room, the air was thick with rage. The men shifted restlessly in their seats, some with bandages across arms and faces, all of them haunted. Blackwood stood at the front, his voice raw with barely restrained fury. 2 missions, 2 ambushes, same precision, same jamming. This isn't coincidence. Someone is bleeding our intel. Murmurs rippled through the room, sharp, angry, fearful. Grace sat quietly, watching. She didn't need to add her voice. The truth was already burning in every pair of eyes. Hayes entered then, silence following her like a shadow. She moved to the front, her expression calm, controlled. I've reviewed the reports, she said. Yes, the enemy knew we were coming. That doesn't mean there's a traitor inside. It could mean compromised satellites, intercepted transmissions, bad encryption. We will investigate. Blackwood's hand slammed the table. With respect, ma'am, that's not good enough. We buried 3 men today, and the only way the enemy could have known our exact LZ, our timing, our insertion path, is if someone here gave it to them. The room went still, all eyes on Hayes. For the first time, her mask cracked. Be careful, Chief. That kind of accusation tears units apart. They're already apart, Grace said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. Heads turned. Every man in the room stared at her. Grace stood slowly, her posture straight, her voice low but steady. We all felt it, both times. The enemy wasn't waiting by chance. They were waiting for us. Someone fed them, and until we admit that, we're going to keep losing men. Her words landed like stones. Some nodded silently. Others looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Hayes's eyes narrowed. That's enough, Lieutenant. But it wasn't enough. The silence that followed was proof. Every operator in the room now carried doubt, not just of the enemy, but of each other. The debrief broke, men leaving in restless silence. Grace stayed behind, gathering her notes. When the room was empty, Hayes approached her. You're walking a dangerous line, Hayes said, her voice low. Grace met her eyes. So are you. For a moment, Hayes's mask slipped again. Something flickered, fatigue or maybe fear. Then it was gone. That night Grace sat on her bunk, the drive still hidden beneath her gear. She hadn't turned it over. She hadn't trusted anyone enough. Not even Blackwood, though he had stood beside her on the ridge. Trust was a currency she no longer had. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but suffocates. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, the hum of distant machinery filling the silence. Voices haunted her, whispering we were betrayed, Blackwood growling inside, Hayes warning make sure you survive what you find. Sleep didn't come. When dawn finally broke, Grace rose with the certainty of a woman who knew a storm was coming. Because the betrayal wasn't just tearing missions apart anymore. It was tearing them apart from the inside. And unless she found the truth soon, the next mission wouldn't just claim more lives. It would claim the seals themselves. Why did the truth always come with silence first? The base felt different in the days after the ambush. The laughter that once filled the halls was gone. Men spoke in low tones, glancing over their shoulders. The mess hall was hushed. Training sessions ran like clockwork, but no one dared joke, no one dared relax. Trust had cracked. Grace carried herself as always steady, precise, unflinching, but inside she felt the fracture. Every mission brief, every file she studied, every corridor she walked through was weighted with suspicion. She had the drive, the comms logs, tucked away like a live grenade. Proof of betrayal. Proof that someone among them had chosen their deaths. But who could she give it to? Hayes, the same commander who had warned her to survive what you find. Blackwood. He had stood beside her in fire, yes, but the betrayal was still alive and Grace had learned the hard way. Trust was dangerous. One night the choice was forced. She found the envelope under her door. Plain, unmarked, no signature. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 2 words typed across it. Stop digging. Grace read it twice, her face expressionless, though her pulse beat harder. Whoever had slipped it under her door hadn't been careless. They wanted her to know she was being watched, wanted her to feel the eyes in every shadow. She folded the note carefully, slid it into her pocket and sat on the edge of her bunk. Fear didn't come. Fear had left her long ago, somewhere between the first shot she ever fired and the last hostage she'd cut free. What came instead was resolve. The betrayal was no longer a whisper. It was here, breathing against her neck. The next day Blackwood found her in the armory. His voice was quiet, gravel low. You're getting pressure too, aren't you? Grace studied him. The lines in his face were deeper now, carved by guilt and anger. He looked like a man carrying a war on 2 fronts, the enemy outside and the enemy within. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the drive from her pocket, pressed it into his hand. His eyes flicked down, then back up to hers. What is this? Proof, she said softly. Comms transmissions. Coordinates fed out of this base. The same ones that got us ambushed twice. He clenched his fist around the drive, his jaw tight. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded once, a soldier's nod, agreement without words. They worked quietly after that. At night, while others slept, they combed the data, cross-referencing transmissions, times, access logs. Piece by piece, a picture emerged, and with each piece, Grace's stomach hardened. He had been careless, yes, but only a shadow. The real leak had used him as a diversion. The patterns pointed higher. Clearance levels couldn't touch. Blackwood slammed a fist against the desk when the last file loaded. God damn it! His voice broke with fury. Grace stared at the name. She wanted to disbelieve it, wanted to deny what the evidence made undeniable. But she had learned long ago, the battlefield didn't care what you wanted. It only gave you truth. Commander Hayes. The woman who had given the order for deployment. The woman who had told them survival probability was less than 40%. The woman who had warned Grace to survive what you find. The betrayal was her. Blackwood's voice was a growl. She sold us out. Grace's throat tightened, but her voice was steady. She sold them out. The Marines, our pilots, our brothers, she's feeding them piece by piece. They sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down. Hayes wasn't just their commander. She was the system they served. To accuse her meant breaking the very ground they stood on. But silence was complicity. The next morning, Grace requested an audience. Hayes granted it. The commander's office was dim, blinds closed, her figure a silhouette behind the desk. "You wanted to see me," Hayes said. Grace closed the door behind her. "I know." Hayes's eyes flicked up sharp. "Know what?" "The transmissions," Grace said, voice calm. "The ambushes, it was you." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Hayes leaned back, her lips curving just slightly. Not denial, not surprise, something worse. Acceptance. "You're sharper than they give you credit for," Hayes said. "But you don't understand. Wars aren't won with perfect missions. Wars are won with narratives, sacrifices, failures that justify the next step." Grace's stomach turned. "You sacrificed them." "I positioned them," Hayes corrected. "And their loss made Washington move. Budgets open. Approvals come. You think those lives were wasted. They'll fuel 100 missions that save 1,000 more." Grace stepped closer, her voice low, sharp as a blade. "They weren't yours to spend." Hayes studied her, unflinching. "You think you can expose me? You're a name in a file, a woman who shouldn't have passed training. They'll bury your word before it leaves this office." Grace's hand brushed the recorder in her pocket. The drive, the data, the proof. She already had what she needed. Hayes didn't realize she was already undone. "I don't need to expose you," Grace said quietly. "The truth will." Hayes's smile thinned. "Truth doesn't win wars, Lieutenant. Power does." Grace held her gaze. "Then maybe you've forgotten what power really is." When she left the office, she didn't look back. It took weeks, but the proof spoke louder than any accusation. The files Blackwood helped her decrypt reached the right ears, the ones above Hayes. A quiet storm followed. No headlines, no fanfare, just absence. Hayes's office emptied overnight. Her name erased from the rosters, her portrait pulled from the walls. She had been removed quietly, the way the military cleans its wounds. But the scar remained. Grace stood on the range weeks later, the sun beating down on her shoulders, her voice steady as she instructed another group of recruits. Their rifles cracked in unison, brass raining against the dirt. She walked the line, correcting grips, adjusting stances, speaking words that weren't just about weapons, but about survival. Blackwood watched from a distance. His face, once carved with doubt, now carried only respect. He had called her experiment, called her mistake, but now he watched her as the standard. Grace paused at the end of the line, her eyes on the horizon. The base was quiet, but not the silence of doubt, the silence of something else, respect. She thought of the Marines, of the pilot whose had burned, of the 3 men zipped in black bags. Hayes had called them sacrifices. Grace refused. They were lives, each one irreplaceable, each one worth fighting for. And as the recruits lowered their rifles, waiting for her next command, Grace understood the truth she had carried all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg for permission. It acts. And when it does, the silence it leaves behind is louder than any war cry.